This is Jordan Martin, and this is my persuasive speech, and this is my audience.
1,
2,
3,
4,
5,
6,
7,
8, 9, 10,
11,
12,
13.
And 14 with the baby. Thanks.
So, what is the recommended tip percentage when you go to a restaurant? Did you know there is a recommended tip percentage? For most of Americans, we think that tipping sometime is recommended at restaurants, but not mandatory. Today, I'm going to persuade you that tipping should be mandatory in restaurants. Now, when that comes to tipping, it should be around 15 to 20%, but we're going to talk about why that should be a thing and the mandatory procedure that comes behind that. We, as college students, business professionals, people in our daily lives, are busy. We have tight budgets, and so when we go to restaurants, it's important to remember that we need to factor in the tip pre-tax while we're ordering with the menu. That way, when you order your chicken sandwich for $10, you remember that you need to add that extra couple dollars when you get the bill. That way, we're not going to be surprised when it's done. So let's address the problem. The problem in the US is that there's a lack of knowledge on what the appropriate tip amount should be. The appropriate tip amount should be 15 to 20%. This was put in 75 years ago by the TIP Act in the FSLA. The FSLA is the Fair Labor Standards Act. According to the Economic Policy Institute, July 20th, 2016, 23 years and still waiting for change, it states that the FSCLA gave the opportunity for Americans to tip their workers because they have a subcategory minimum wage. What is a subcategory minimum wage? That means a regular minimum wage is $8. The subcategory for most servers in Missouri is around $3. That means the tip credit allows us to subsidize that distance between the minimum wage and what servers actually get paid. This is really important to remember because servers rely on us to make money through the tip because that's the way that they get generously compensated. While tips should compensate a server more than what they do, a lot of the time it is very little compensation to what they actually receive. For those that don't work in restaurants, they don't understand that a tip is split between bussers, hosts, servers, cooks, and bartenders. So that $2 that you give to a server actually gets split up to around 25 cents, depending on if there's a tip share or not in the restaurant. So as discussed in NPR News, July 8th, 2019, even at the best restaurants, servers don't make that kind of good money. Author discusses how strenuous the serving career can be between lack of tips, lack of wages, and lack of hours. A lot of the times, as in this article, it discusses that servers will go to work and managers will say, well, sorry, you don't need to work today because we're not busy. Well, this affects the server and the rest of the workers in the restaurant. When the servers aren't making money, the rest of the restaurant is not. So to address the problem of tips on credit cards, tips on credit cards like American Express and other things like that are given to the server. So let's say you make a $5 tip on a credit card. The server then has to tax that tip from the credit card, which reduces their tip. So let's say you give them $5, they may walk out of the restaurant with $4.50. Well, after that credit card fee, they then have to tax the full tip as well. So then that takes it down, we're just gonna say $4 to make it easy. After they reduce the tip to $4, they then have to split that tip among all of the other workers like previously said, which reduces it even more. So when you are thinking about tipping a server 10%, remember how low that actually goes. So be generous, show them the compensation, and tip them the 20%. When servers are required to be taxed on the full tip, they don't receive it like I said before. So that's why it's even important. So now that we recognize the huge problem in not tipping, we're gonna look at the solutions of tipping well. The solution to our problem is to correct the perspective in what we look at tipping to be. we need to make sure that we make tipping in our minds mandatory versus optional. So, according to US Today, June 22nd, 2017, tipping, is it ever okay to skip the tip? There's a discussion on why the pre-tax tip is 15 to 20% for every sit-down restaurant. This is a recommendation, but not a price ceiling. What does that mean? That means that 15 to 20% is not the maximum. If a server does an amazing job, you can tip them 21%. You could tip them 50%. Whatever your budget allows, that is what you should be doing above that 15%. If we change the mentality of tipping in restaurants, then we don't have to implement forced or implied tips on the menus. Not only is there security for the servers and the bartenders when you tip well, but also you are going to get much better service. When you go to your favorite restaurant and they know you will tip in a way that is satisfactory to their needs, then they will work even harder to show you that they should earn that tip. So what can we do? When you go out to eat in the future, tip 15 to 20% like I said. If someone gives you bad service, at least tip them around 5 to 10%. The thing is that a lot of restaurants, like I mentioned before, have tipping pools, which means that servers split all the tips. So if you give a bad server nothing at all, it's going to hurt all of the other employees in the restaurant. So instead of not tipping anything at all, my suggestion would be to grab a manager, let them know what was wrong, and maybe suggest retraining for the server. That way, other people ahead of you will not be affected by that same bad service, and it's going to help you out in the long run. If each of us do our part to change tipping culture to do something that is included in our eating budget, then our service is going to be changed. So now imagine this solution. Go to a restaurant, sitting down, and realizing that your food is triple the price because tipping has been taken away. I wouldn't be too happy. According to PBS March 26th, 2016, Why Do We Tip? Covers tips on what would happen if we took away tipping. What would happen if we took away tipping is that food would be more expensive. We would not be able to afford to eat out, and ultimately, the economic structure in the hospitality industry would be totally transformed. Our lives as we know it, going to Applebee's, would be a lot more expensive. So the tipping now is worth it on the front end. So after all of this persuasion, we're going to look at a few arguments that people make and some recommendations on why those shouldn't be arguments. The first is some argue that some servers don't deserve any tip at all because they are terrible. Well, my answer to that was already previously stated. Instead of not tipping them anything at all, you should at least tip them something, because instead of a gratuity, it's actually paying them for the service or little service that they gave you. So 5 to 10% is recommended. Another argumentation is that they say that they don't have enough to tip servers and that in other countries they actually don't tip servers at all. Well, the refutation of this is in Save the Student, November 14th, 2018, 16 Easy Ways to Eat Out on a Budget. It stresses the importance of planning ahead for a tipping, and then also when people try to argue that other countries don't tip, it's because they pay their servers an actual wage, and so it's built into the industry. So, in conclusion, I found the problem in the US is that our perception on tipping is a little skewed. But how can we change that? The solution is to keep our tipping consistent and be proactive. Talk to managers, talk to the server, and get to the root of the problem. If we don't end up tipping at restaurants, we may be paying $50 for a $25 steak. So the next time you sit down at your favorite restaurant and you ask the server their name, ask them why they started serving, and start the conversation there.